over, we've got the amazing Scott Dixon, consumer right absolute expert, who's with us now to tell us more about, our rights on this sort of thing. Scott, sorry, that was a very long-winded introduction. Just wanted to let you know my afternoon.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that everything's come out okay for you, Molly. Yeah, worrying time.
Well, it is for that specific one. It's life or death for the cat. But over Christmas, in the run-up to Christmas, we've all had it. And I was moaning on air a few weeks ago that I'd ordered some presents and the delivery company said, they've been delivered. I had an email and they certainly hadn't. It's so stressful having things delivered home, isn't it?
It is, and the first thing you have to remember is that your contract is always with the retailer and not the courier, so it's not your responsibility to chase the courier, although you can take a two-pronged approach. But ultimately, Section 29 of the Consumer Rights Act 2015 states that the goods remain at the trader's risk until they come into the physical possession of the consumer or a person identified by the consumer to take possession of the goods. Or, you've identified a safe place for the goods to be left and things like that. So, if you don't get the goods delivered, it's their responsibility to resolve it. And they can either re-deliver the goods or give you a refund. And if they've tried to re-deliver the goods and that's failed, you just go straight for a refund. But it's easier said than done. And you've got to play fair with small businesses, especially because they are struggling with the cost of living crisis and postal strikes and things like that. But if all else fails, you can raise a charge back with your bank or your credit card company and get a refund that way. But that has to be a last resort, really.
Scott, was it you I spoke to 3 or 4 weeks back?
It was, yes.
I thought so. And do you know what, Scott? Because there was steam coming out of my ears, wasn't there, about it was my mum and dad's Christmas presents that I had an email saying they'd been delivered and they hadn't. And you, on that interview a month or so ago, you gave me gave everybody a couple of things to quote in the letter. Something, you'll have to reiterate them now, something like, quote this act of 19 whatever. And I wrote an email that afternoon with a couple of things you'd said. I got a full refund within about 24 hours when I'd been asking for about a month.
That's brilliant.
So thank you.
What you need to do is cite breach of contract under the Consumer Rights Act 2015.
There you go.
And once you read that back to a retailer, they know that you know your rights, you know what you're on about,
scared.
And it works like a charm. And it always helps to know your legal rights, and because it's all too easy just to be fobbed off and ultimately ripped off. And I'm pleased to hear that it worked for you in that case. I'm
sure, because I've been trying for weeks, I'm sure it's because I quoted those bits and bobs from you. And as you say, once you look like you know what you're doing, they have to take notice. So that's
right.
Great.
Yeah, and it's difficult for retailers and courier companies. The courier companies are working against the clock and everything else, but we've all heard stories about them parcels being left in wheelie bins and thrown over walls and things like that. And if the goods are damaged, it's not the courier company that you need to deal with. It's always the retailer, because it's their responsibility to ensure that the goods arrive safely, undamaged, fit for purpose, as described, satisfactory quality, and all that is framed within the Consumer Rights Act 2015. So it's worth bearing in mind. And as I say, if all else fails, just raise a chargeback within 120 days with your bank or credit card provider and cite breach of contract under the Consumer Rights Act 2015. But as I say, consumers have rights, but so do retailers, and I think it's all about being reasonable, really, isn't it?
Being fair, yeah. Moving on to Christmas presents, it's the week of the year, Scott, when people will be reflecting on what they've got, and maybe they're thinking, and they don't want to ask for a receipt to take back what they've got. How does that work? Can you take it back to a shop, or do you legally need a receipt?
You can take it back to a shop, but ultimately you're relying on the goodwill of the store, because if the goods are not faulty, the store doesn't have to give you a refund. And they do tend to give extended, like over and above rights and everything else over the festive period. But I would say, be reasonable, be nice, and you get what you give in that regard, but you're relying on the terms and conditions of the retailer. So you may get a gift card card or a credit note, or you may get a refund, but it varies, and it's not an automatic legal entitlement if the goods are not faulty, unfortunately.
So there's a difference between statutory rights and additional policies that a retailer might advertise at point of sale?
Yeah, that's right. It's worth looking up on the internet to see what the terms and conditions are for the store, because the staff are, as you know, training and things like that. One staff member may say something different to another, and if you haven't got anything in writing, so when you're lodging complaints, always put everything in writing. But in this case that we're speaking about, I would look up the terms and conditions of the retailer so you can see specifically what your legal rights are. Well, what your legal rights are and what their terms and conditions are for refunds and things like that. Because, as I say, I don't do phone calls because it's all too easy just to be misled or fobbed off and things like that. So always look at what they say online.
Do you know, I tried to complain about a missing parcel this morning online. Couldn't get through to a human. It was one of these automated things that you have to quote numbers and this, that and the other. I was screaming at it by the end of the phone call. Every time I said something like 671, it would say, "You said 73. Is this correct?" It went on and on and on. It is so frustrating, isn't it, trying to get hold of certain, not all of them, because some of them are brilliant, but certain delivery companies or if you want to make a complaint, it's difficult.
It is, and there is a good website that you can use to look up the CEO email addresses of firms, and it's called ceoemail.com. And you're not going to contact the CEO, but your complaint will be escalated to the top table, so it goes to the escalated complaints resolution team, and that's one way of bypassing the low-hanging fruit, if you like, and getting your complaint noticed and dealt with. But it also helps, as you know, to know your legal rights when you're lodging complaints. So most complaints fall under the Consumer Rights Act 2015, and fit for purpose as described, satisfactory quality, last a reasonable length of time. And if you cite breach of contract under the Consumer Rights Act 2015 within the context of your complaint,
yeah, it sounds good.
It's worth knowing. And firms don't make it easy, and that's a problem in itself. Customer service in this country has nosedived during COVID, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better.
But also with the Royal Mail strikes, can you imagine the backlog? Not just with Royal Mail, but because people are using different carriers. I feel sorry for people who are working in complaints departments. It must be overwhelming at the moment.
It is, and if you've specified a specific date for your goods to arrive and they arrive late, if you've paid extra for that special delivery, you're entitled to a refund for that amount that you've paid because it's a breach of contract. The service hasn't been delivered with due care and skill, and that falls under Section 49 of the Consumer Rights Act 2015. So if goods arrive late and you don't want them, under the Consumer Contracts Regulations 2013, you've got up to 14 days to notify the retailer that you wish to return the goods, and you've got another 14 days after that to actually return the goods. So it's distance selling regulations. It's a cooling off period. So it's to give you the opportunity to inspect the goods, but you can also apply that if the goods arrive late and you just don't want them. If it was for somebody's Christmas present and it arrives after Christmas, well, it's no use to you, really, is it? So.
Oh, really? Good to know. Just a final question. Linda's just given us a call here at the station and asks, what's the difference, Scott, between using a debit card online versus a credit card? She doesn't have a credit card, so does it give, if she did, would that give her more protection?
A credit card gives you more protection because under Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act 1974, it holds the credit card company jointly liable for purchases over £100, whereas under the debit card scheme, it's a voluntary scheme that's run by the banks, but you can raise a chargeback within 120 days with your debit card or your credit card if goods fail to arrive or if something is faulty and you can't resolve your dispute with the retailer. But always pay by credit card if possible, because it does give you that additional free insurance. But if you don't have a credit card, Section 75 doesn't apply, but you do have the voluntary chargeback scheme within 120 days of purchase to raise against the retailer via the bank.
Scott, what would we do without you? Thank you for all of the info, and I urge everybody, if you're in a pickle with something, go back, if you didn't write it all down, go back to BBC Sounds and listen to Scott again and write down the legal bits, because that does scare.